University. Professor Nedzel's interests include interrelationship among the market economy, technology, the rule of law, and personal autonomy. He's a visiting research scholar at the Lauterbach Center for International Law at Cambridge University. She's a member of the Louisiana Advisory to the United States Civil Rights Commission. She served as a staff attorney for the United States Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, and she earned her J.D. magna cum laude from Loyola University School of Law and an LLM with honors from Northwestern University. Give her a hand.
Thank you. And I see what was true of Loyola students in my day is still true. If you feed them, they will come. That and giving some credit, I realized that there are a couple of motivations going on here. I'm also originally a Chicago girl, so go Cubs, yay!
Yeah.
Okay, it's been a long time coming. So I'm going to be talking about the rule of law and economic development that have something of an interrelationship. My thesis is that it's like a chicken and an egg, okay? Which came first? The chicken or the egg? There really is no one without the other. And they're both examples of Hayek's spontaneous order. Spontaneous order. These are societal constructs, associations, institutions that arise on their own over time. In The Fatal Conceit, Hayek pointed out that extended or spontaneous order of a market economy provides a more efficient allocation of societal resources than any human design could achieve, and is superior to any order that a human mind could design because the human mind cannot, by itself, aggregate the necessary data. In a market economy, price is the aggregation of information acquired by individuals, thus allowing those dealing in a commodity to make decisions based on more information that they could acquire personally or from any centralized authority. Thus, the market economy's inherent efficiency benefits the entire society. However, Hayek saw the strength and usefulness of this idea of spontaneous order in much more than just economics. I don't know if you know this, but he was actually trained in law before he started studying economics. In Volume 1 of Law, Legislation, and Liberty, he posits that what he termed constructivist rationalism, what I might call positivism, is a false view of institutions, social institutions, including law. False in a couple of different ways, and destructive in a couple of different ways. Existing institutions are not entirely ever the product of design. So that's a false view. So a false view that this is human design, it greatly restricts the utilization of available knowledge. And it's false and it conceives the human mind as being able to stand outside itself and look back. We can't stand outside ourselves. We're cutting off half of our intelligence that way. We're cutting off all our inductive knowledge by reducing everything to deductive knowledge. So human institutions grow organically. So in this way, I think we can have a much greater view of how these two things are interrelated if we look at it from a spontaneous order, spontaneous growth view, than if we try to look at it from a deductive view. As a teacher, it's much easier for me to reduce things to a major postulate, a minor postulate, and a conclusion. Socratic, a syllogism. But that makes it easier for you to learn, but that's not what happened. Okay, so we turn it upside down. The rule of law is the first construct we're talking about, the first term. And it's difficult to define. What I give here are a lot of different words. Okay? The World Justice Project is an international organization that says it's promoting the rule of law. And it says there are 4 necessities. The rule of law has to apply to all, the government, officials, agents, individuals, everybody's accountable under the law. 2, laws and rights. Laws are clear, publicized, stable, and just. Legal process. Process is enacted, administered, and enforced as accessible, fair, and efficient, independent judiciary. Lots of words. Then I looked it up in an American legal dictionary. Again, lots of words. We've got 3 different definitions. The supremacy of regular as opposed to arbitrary power, the doctrine that every person is subject to ordinary law, the doctrine that general constitutional principles, blah, blah, blah. Okay? There's a related institution, a related concept called Rechtsstaat, or l'état du droit. This is what they have across on the other side of the Atlantic, okay? In France and Germany. And so they say it's the same thing. World Justice Project says it's the same thing. They define that as a state in which the exercise of government power is constrained by law, but it differs, even they admit it differs from the rule of law in that it emphasizes what is just, morally right, natural law, rationality, religion, or equity. You've got to have all that stuff into it. That's too hard for me, okay? That's too many words. Yes, I'm a lawyer. I deal in words. That's what I do. But I want something more simple, something that's more memorable. And I think John Adams came up with the most elegant way to define the rule of law. It's a government of laws, not of men. So the government is superior over men. Hayek divided it into 2 concepts. The first he called isonomia, which is a Greek term, equality of law. Everybody is bound equally by the law. That means whether you're a government official, the king, a peasant, it all applies the same to everybody. And the second thing he said is necessary is the law of liberty, that the purpose of law must be to protect liberty, and the purpose of government is limited to enforcing those laws that protect liberty. My definition, I like to reduce them down to 2, equal law and limited government. Equal law and limited government. Let me move forward on a couple of things here. So, how can we demonstrate that? Well, I'm going to say that the rule of law and economic freedom you see more in what I'll call the Anglosphere. Ooh, that's not politically correct. Okay? I'm saying that you're going to see more rule of law and more economic development, a tendency towards that, in countries that have evolved from the common law. Well, who has evolved from the common law? Any ideas? Britain. Who else? U.S. Singapore. Canada, up north, right? New Zealand. They account for about 10%. 90% of the countries in the world are civil law. By civil law, I mean a country where judges don't have much power. They're regarded as civil servants. Every law is legislative. They passed. They descended, like Louisiana did, from the civil law. Okay. So I have, let's see if I can escape this for a minute, and pull up something to show you the rule of law index and some backup for my thesis. I want this, the interactive map. Am I getting the interactive map? Oh, we need to see. Try it again.
You good enough to help him?
This is this year's study.
Who is it?
Rule of law index. Let's try this button. Maybe it'll come up. What you will see when it, and if it does come up, is that the top 10 countries for rule of law are going to include Scandinavia, okay, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, England, New Zealand, Singapore, Australia. So it is these countries, the Anglosphere, plus a few very far northern Protestant generated countries that have the highest. And since this didn't work, I'm not going to try the other one. The other one is the heritage.org Index of Economic Freedom. So with both economic freedom and rule of law studies, you find more Anglosphere countries in the top 10 than you do civil law countries. And this has been the case since 2007. Now, the factors that they use in order to see this are not necessarily that accurate because they don't really define, as an economist has said to me, they don't really define economic freedom properly. They allow for a lot of government intervention. So Steve Hayovich did work with Heritage.org and Wall Street Journal and discovered that the harmonized score, you want a lower number, is better. So legal tradition, common law gets a 1.75, civil law on the continent, 2.1, and when you just limit it to major capitalist countries, the difference was even more. So this is something scholars have been talking about for a long time. Am I saying that one is better and one is worse? Not really, no. I'm just saying they're different, but it depends to a certain extent on what you want and what you think is valuable. So how did we get this way? Why Anglo dominance? And my argument is that it's historical accident, and it's a different culture, and it's different philosophy, and different thought patterns. So I'm going to give you, rather than a deductive argument, because that won't work, to talk about something that arrives spontaneously. Let's take a look at history. Look at the details here. In continental Europe, you had, it was the type of thinking that was founded by the ancient Greeks and Romans. They did not separate between law, philosophy, or religion. And government controlled everything you did, every aspect of your life. If you wore a purple robe and you weren't the king, you might never be seen again. Okay? So that was government rule over every aspect of life, deductive thought. Something we also call teleology. Everything had its place. You weren't an individual. You were addressed by your status. Slave, freeman, prince, noble, you were addressed by your status. Bless you. Then, as time moved on, we moved into feudalism, where your allegiance was to a lord. He would protect you from invaders, and in exchange you would either serve in his army or give a portion of the crop that you raised on his land as a peasant, or you might belong to a guild. So this was still not an age of individual endeavor. This was peasants in continental Europe. When they farmed land, it was a collective. They sat on that land, nobody really owned it. Papa might die, and then Uncle Joe would take it over. When Uncle Joe passed, then it would be cousin Max or somebody, but there was no title to it. Then there was the discovery of Justinian's Digest around the 12th century. Who was Justinian? He was one of the first great Christian emperors. He became Christian. He was in the Eastern Empire in Constantinople, and he collected all the law into one place. All the law for ancient Rome was in one place, and it was readable. And this digest was taken by the universities, starting Bologna, Italy, all over Europe, and it was adopted. So what were the sources of law all over Europe beginning in the 12th century? Justinian's Digest, canon law. What is canon law? Church law. And local customary law. So every little locality had its own law. Well, that doesn't make for a lot of control, does it? So the noblemen really didn't pay much attention to the kings at that time. Kings were a little unhappy about that. There were a lot of small entities that could easily be taken over. But Justinian's Digest said the emperor is the law, the king is the law. And now these little kings are going, wait a second, wait, I like this Justinian's Digest. And it sort of gives me reason to put power together and take control over other people. Now, if I can get Roman law applied to my citizens, my peasants, then I've got better control over them. The concept of sovereignty also arose. This is my kingdom. Then we had the discovery of the New World, the discovery of the printing press, the invention of the printing press. In Holland, we had dikes and windmills, so we've got an explosion of technology. Reading spread very quickly, and when reading spread, people discovered, oh, I can read the Bible for myself. I don't need a priest to do it for me. Luther posted 95 objections to the church in Germany, and Protestantism spread. Now, as this was spreading, the kings were getting larger kingdoms. They were starting to think about mercantilist stuff. I've got all those, I've discovered Spain. We're going to bring back gold. The more gold I have, the more gold I take from somebody else, the bigger I am, right? So we've got a bunch of mercantilist countries. Then we've got the Dutch Republic. The Dutch Republic was weird. It was supposed to be ruled by Spain, but Philip II was so far away. They were up north. They said, wait a second, we've got all these strong guilds. He can't really do anything. We've got to start governing ourselves. Spontaneous order, spontaneous laws, spontaneous governmental organizations. And then he brought in the, he started attacking Protestants. There was about 80 years war between Spain and Holland, but the Dutch Republic finally survived. And they brought in, with the dikes, they brought in tremendous agricultural growth. With the shipping, they were responsible for shipping grain to Spain from the Baltic. Why? Spain was starving. The king had cut a deal with the farmer, with the sheep herders, to spread sheep herding, so he wanted more wool because he could get more money with more wool at the expense of grain for his populace, which was starving. So the Dutch took advantage of that. They also sold herring. That rose to natural law. Now we're thinking with these Protestant concepts, and that led to Rousseau. Well, Rousseau is still doing deductive thought. He's still saying, well, you know, government really is there to make people good. The Robespierre took Rousseau's ideas, and he said, well, we can't just do what they've done in America, because our people have never had freedom. We have to remake society. We have to get rid of these third states. So we're going to force them to have a revolution. So what are some of the themes here? Top-down government. The purpose of government is still to do what? Improve society. Roman law it's still Roman law dominant because that's spread all over Europe. We're still defined by status, not by individuals. Deduction from first principles, teleology from ancient Greece is still enacted. Law, as from the Roman Digest, should be organized, predictable, and should be primarily by legislation, because we don't know what those judges are doing. We can never tell what a judge is doing. So we went from feudalism to mercantilism to capitalism. From Catholic to Calvinist, and here's something that was very interesting. The Calvinists developed a work ethic, a calling. See, it's no longer that you're waiting for heaven in the next world. You needed to have something to do on earth to show that you were worthy of going to heaven. And so your work was more than just a job. It was a calling, something that was important to do, important to show others you were doing. That spread from Holland to England. And England, as I said, it grew differently in England. I'll show you how in a moment. They also developed from Justinian's Digest. Napoleon came up with the Civil Code, the first Civil Code. As a matter of fact, ours is patterned after that first one, and that spread all over the continent, except for Britain. Okay. Let's do this. Now, I've given you a little bit of the history of continental Europe. England was different. England was different. Whereas in Europe, you were tied to a feudal lord. In England, the Anglo-Saxon tribesmen would elect their kings. They'd elect their kings, and they'd unelect them too, in something called a wittenagemot. So they'd shake their spears if they agreed, they'd shake their spears if they disagreed, and somebody was no longer king. That didn't happen in continental Europe, but it happened repeatedly in England, even after the Normans conquered it. We had 6 kings who were deposed between 1216 and 1688. In 1066, that's when William the Conqueror conquered England. And what he found was these people are happy with the law. They think the law is of their folk. It belongs to them, and the king has to follow the law. So he said, okay, I solemnly swear that as I rule England, yes, we'll speak French, but we will follow English law. Well, he had other reasons for doing it as well. England was organized into shires, and the governmental administration was much more functional than the Norman feudalism, so he could actually collect taxes. So he kept the king's law. His grandson, by this time, 2 generations later, they were intermarrying. Henry I married an English woman, Anglo-Saxon. Henry II was a very able administrator. He decided, well, you know, they've only got these local courts. I'm going to try a competing court system. I'm going to have these king's judges ride around the countryside. They called it riding circuit. They'd sit on a bench behind a bar. Okay, so you'd be called to the bar and you'd make your argument. Well, this became very, very popular in England because it was much more objective, more fair. People liked it. Henry said, well, wait a second, you know this trial by ordeal where you fight each other? That's not working. Even the church says that isn't working. So we're going to try trial by jury. If your case is worth more than 40 shillings, you get a jury of your peers, of ordinary people, to judge it. Then they kept records of all the judicial cases so that lawyers, instead of, how do you become a lawyer here now? How do you become a lawyer? Go to law school, get a 3-year JD, and then take the bar exam. That wasn't the case there. While they had canon law in the universities, Henry II had a big fight with his best friend, Becket. And ever since that time, the church lost out because Becket was the archbishop of the church. So church learning for law wasn't Henry's thing. You studied as an apprentice at the Inns of Court that developed. So that was a different way of law. There was one of the first jurists, Bracton, in that same time, the 12th century, said the king is under the law. Not the king is the law, the king is under law. So this kind of limited government started very, very early in England. By the 14th century, new research, historians have shown that peasants in England actually owned their land. Okay? They owned land, or if they leased it from a lord, they could inherit that lease. So that makes a big difference, right? You have much more control over, much more interest. Property ownership has already started. Unlike the continent where peasants could not move around, in England, your children didn't stay by you. They went off and found their own stuff. In France, the law was that, in Louisiana up until 1995, the law was that you had to leave the biggest part of your property to your children. Not in England. In England, they thought, you know, that doesn't make any sense because that doesn't give them our children any impetus to do well on their own. If they know they're going to collect something. So, no kid, you go make it on your own. Maybe I'll leave it to you, maybe I won't. So there's property ownership. There was mobility. There was individual mobility, not just men, but also women. 16th century rose. Now we've got Elizabeth, the mercantilist, the Protestant mercantilist. She wants to increase the size and power of England. She actually helped support the Dutch Republic for a little bit. After she passed, that was the last of the Tudors, and we have Charles I. And he said, well, I'm a good Catholic, I'm going to have divine right. What do you think the British said? I don't think so. Okay. We've gotten rid of worse kings than you, we'll get rid of you too. Oh, and by the way, we want you to sign this thing if we're going to let you stay on the throne a little longer. It's called the Petition of Right. Petition of right. What does that mean? Oh, the king no longer has taxing power. If he wants to tax anybody, he has to get permission from Parliament. This is a long series of fights between the English royalty and their nobles. And the English royalty, unlike the French, the English royalty lost every time. So we have Magna Carta, we have the Petition of Right. We have all these things that keep getting the king's power smaller and smaller. Edward Coke in the 17th century, Edward Cook, I'm sorry, I mispronounced it, Edward Cook. Like Bracton, he was one of those jurists, one of those judges who was amazing. He caused trouble wherever he went. King James appointed him he was on the Common Court, and on the Common Court he invented contract law. Before that time, if you had a dispute with somebody who didn't follow through on your contract, there wasn't much you could do about it. You know, unless it was signed, sealed, and delivered that this person owed you money, there wasn't much you could do about it. But by that time, the English wool merchants were growing. And the court took a look at this and said, wait a second, we charge fees to come into court. Most of these cases are worth a lot more than 40 shillings. We could make a lot of money if we heard contract cases. So Edward Cook, in Slade's case, said, you know, even if it's not money and you didn't write it down, if you had what we'll call a contract, we will enforce it. We will hear it, we will enforce it. This is a monumental change. A monumental change, because now we've got not just property law that affects individuals and is applied to individuals, but also contract law that applies to individuals. Then he turned around and he said, oh, wait a second, King. Oh, wait a second, Parliament. You know, you can't go beyond the boundaries of the power you've been given. When you threw that doctor in jail because he was practicing without a license, you didn't have the power to do that. Under the written laws, you have the power to charge him £10 and not throw him in jail. That's the beginning of judicial review. Edward Cook, no more monopolize king. Oh, at this point, the king got fed up with him. So he threw him off the bench. Threw him into the Tower of London for a little bit, and then threw him off the bench. He got elected to Parliament. Okay? And in Parliament, he said, okay, king, no more monopolies. And it was after that that we started getting big companies like the British East India Company. Lloyd's of London was founded. And Locke started writing. 1688, the Glorious Revolution. And it was after this that the British economy, the British government was stable for the first time, and so a private bank was started by subscription to the public. Within a few weeks, it had raised $1.2 million. I'm sorry, not dollars, pounds, 1.2 million pounds. And thus, the Royal Bank of England was started. The king subsequently granted it a charter. He needed a Royal Navy, and they raised the money for that in just a few days. So by the 18th century, Englishmen expected no taxation without representation. They expected trial by jury. In other words, the rule of law, separation of powers. They had the biggest, baddest economy in the world at the time. Adam Smith wrote, Hume wrote. So what can we summarize about England? Government was limited. They used inductive thought. What have we done in the past that worked? What have we done in the past that didn't work? Well, we'll do the one and not do the other. Not this deduction from first principles. They rejected Roman law. Limitations on government increased, not decreased over time. Judge-based law was primary, not legislation. Individual liberty was primary, the right to be left alone. So this was experience-based. Now it goes across the pond to the United States, and what are we doing? What do we do with it? Well, our colonists expected the same rights that every other Englishman had. Those negative rights, the right to be left alone. Not a list of positive rights. You have a right to a trial by jury. Oh, well, what does that mean? It tends to get defined more narrowly over time. So these are negative rights. The Calvinist work ethic also came through. They read Locke, Smith, Hume, and Montesquieu. And while they liked political theory, they were practical men who lived in the real world. They founded their own, they wrote their constitutions for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and elsewhere and showed what, and figured out what worked and what didn't. What Benjamin Franklin once said was, if all men were angels, government wouldn't be needed. But all men are not angels, and certainly not those who are in government. So they wrote a constitution with checks and balances. Now, checks and balances are something different from the separation of powers that Montesquieu came up with by looking at England. Checks and balances, these are things where we're going to set up competition among the different branches of government. So if you look at our Constitution, it has that competition built in. But more than that, there are also cultural things that act as checks. The jury, well, how is the jury a check? It's a check on both government and on big business. How can a jury be a check on government? Any idea? Yeah.
Did they, what's it called when they let someone go when they did for the crime or vice versa?
Jury nullification.
Yeah.
We had an example of that just a few days ago, right? The Bundy case up in Nevada where the jury said, no, we think the federal government outstepped its power and we don't care what's written on the paper. We're not finding these guys guilty. A check on big business. What are some of the biggest businesses you can think of right now? Multinational, fast food business. McDonald's? Apple, yes. McDonald's. Well, McDonald's is notoriously mean at litigating. Okay? They had superheated coffee that they often sold that way, and they just told you, know, it's hot coffee, be careful. So one little old lady burned herself. She had a long string of people who burned herself with the hot coffee. She put it between her legs as she drove off from the drive-in. It spilled, and she ended up with third-degree burns in very painful portions of her anatomy. All she wanted was her medical expenses. But McDonald's said, this is ridiculous. You knew that it was hot coffee. Nobody in their right mind would do that. So we're not settling. We've settled all the others. We're not settling. So they take her to court. The jury sits there. And you think the jury didn't think that this was stupid, that she should have known it was hot coffee? Of course they did. But they awarded her $20 million. Anyways, anybody know why? Yeah.
I actually saw that case. They actually showed images of burning hot coffee.
Yeah.
Basically, like fire, practically like
Yeah,
fire.
of course. Is it because they were that bad?
They were pretty serious.
What, the birds were terrible, but, it's, you drink hot coffee, you don't spill on yourself.
The number was derived from some calculation of how much money McDonald's makes on
2
coffee.
days profit.
2 days.
2 days profit, okay? That's how they calculated. And what the jury felt was that they were just so angry at how pompous, arrogant, and callous McDonald's was that they assessed them 2 days profit. Okay? Right. Okay. What if they were acting in their own best interest? What would McDonald's have done with the little old lady case? Settled it. It would have cost them a lot less. Yeah.
Well, wasn't McDonald's trying to establish a precedent, though, to prevent settlements in the future?
Right.
It would save them more money in the long run if they won the case.
No, not really. If they won the case, I don't think they would have. I don't think that they would still be sued. This is a litigious society, and it might settle faster, but they'd still be hanging on. It'd be better just not to keep the coffee that hot. Okay, Madison. Madison looks at the world and he says, it's natural for people to form groups around certain things. These are called factions. But if the factions are around economic issues, then the market will solve that. So we want to encourage factions around economic issues. We want to discourage factions around politics and religion. Why? Why discourage factions around politics and religion? Violence?
You don't want to be too powerful, too influential. they'll suppress the others.
Right, and people go to war over politics and religion, right? Whereas if it's over economics, let's cut a deal, right? This is James Madison, that's Alexander Hamilton. The Constitution was passed in 1789, and Hamilton, the first Secretary of the Treasury, realized by 1791, we've got a lot of debt here. We accrued a lot of debt. We need to be able to pay it off. We need to establish the United States so that we can get credit from foreign powers. So in 1791, he founded the first national bank. And this, unlike the Bank of England, was a public-private concern. The government was going to have 20% stake in it from the beginning. Now, whether this, I've heard arguments that this led directly to the problems of crony capitalism that we've been fighting ever since, but I'll have to leave that to some of the economics people to analyze further. It's not my field of expertise. But in any case, in the following year, 1792, the New York Stock Exchange was founded by 24 brokers underneath a buttonwood tree on Wall Street. Guess what they were trading? Revolutionary War debt and
stock in the bank.
And stock in the bank, yep. Okay, what has happened? There have been a lot of crossovers. You can't just say common law here, civil law there, and near the twain shall meet. There have been a lot of crossovers. Montesquieu, who invented separation of powers, how did he come up with it? He was studying the English government of the 18th century, and he said, this is really good what they're doing. I wish the French would do that. I wish the French would do that. So the French came up with this concept that you have the legislature that makes laws, the executive that enforces them, and the judges that apply the rules. And there the twain shall cross over, not checks and balances. So it's interpreted differently. U.S. Declaration in 1776, inalienable rights versus the French, which was patterned after it, 1789, but listed a bunch of those rights. So the U.S. was negative rights, as in England, the right to be left alone, but the French was positive rights. The government will give you this right, and that right, and the other right. It's all on paper. The government is giving it to you. The government has all the power. National banks crossed over. We saw it go from Holland to England, to the U.S., bonds, judicial review, started in England. Then the U.S. picked it up and ran with it after Marbury versus Madison. And then when we're advising other countries on how to make things better, oh, you need to adopt judicial review. It's vitally important check and balance. Not all of this institutional stuff, cultural stuff, that is the real check and balance. And again, as I told you, 10% of the world is common law, 90% is civil. Why do I have a picture of a blue chicken there? Anybody know whose symbol the blue chicken is?
France.
France. It's the French teams. The French are very proud of their coq bleu, but it looks kind of funny in the middle of Trafalgar Square. So this is just an illustration that ideas, when you bounce them from one place to another, don't necessarily take root the same way. They may take root, but not the same way. Back to Steve Payovich. So why is it that there is this connection between the rule of law and economic development that I've taken you through historically? So while Anglo-American capitalism, the system is self-generating, self-correcting, self-regulating. In contrast, with continental capitalism, the state has to take care of market failures and other problems. Anglo-American capitalism, the government is a predator, which the rule of law has to tame. On the continent, the government is a partner in economic gain. Anglo-American capitalism, the system is about the freedom of choice and private property rights, whereas continental capitalism, the system superimposes social justice over freedom of choice. It's going to tell you what to want. So what are some of the things I'd like you to take away from this? Social institutions, whether it's the rule of law or an economy grown spontaneously, and you learn much more by studying them that way than by trying to put them into a box. They evolve over time, but they still maintain certain characteristics. Common law government, and it's individualistic based, and it is part and parcel, reflexively related to economic freedom, but you also need the technological project, and you need individual autonomy to make the system grow. Now, the rule of law today has been jeopardized, and with it, individualism, initiative, entrepreneurship, and inalienable rights. This is, I think, what has led Britain, the British populace, to vote for Brexit. They don't want to be that tied to the rest of Europe. One of the problems has been, if you ever follow some of the international criminal cases, a number of years ago, there were two terrible terrorists who were about to blow up 2 cars in Malta. They were full of explosives. They had the little clickers in their pockets. And at the very last second, the British Secret Service found them. British soldiers found them, killed them. The European Court of Justice tried England and found that it had denied these 2 terrorists their rights. Does that make a lot of sense? Because if they had denied them their rights, what would have happened? A lot of people would have been denied their lives. So the purpose of, if you look at the purpose of government, is to protect citizens' freedom, that England was doing the right thing. That's the common law methodology. But when you say it doesn't exist, which is what's happening in Europe now, that they say, oh, it's all one. We've converged. We've had a big hug, and common law is the same as civil law. No, it's not. And when you say that it is, you've lost something very valuable. I learned to practice law in Louisiana. I am a civil law attorney. I love the civil law. It's easy to study. It's beautifully organized. It's elegant. But we have something that other civil law countries do not have in Louisiana. And that's the common law competitive system, adversarial system. So we're hybrid mutt. We're mutt. We should have muttly vigor, but we also have inherited the Spanish tendency towards corruption. It's one thing Thomas Jefferson noticed when he bought the place. He said, I'm going to put in good common law and get rid of those corrupt Spanish comandantes. Neither of those things took. Okay, so, you know, I think what it takes is not just, you need to recognize these differences in culture, but you also need to stand up and really object to corruption. You can't say, oh yeah, all government officials are corrupt, it's just the way of the world, I might as well get mine. The minute you do that, what have we done? We've destroyed both the rule of law and we've destroyed the market economy, because you don't know how much you have to pay for something in order to get what you want. You know, this is Hernando de Soto's thesis. So the rule of law, my ending point is the rule of law is incompatible with economic plan. Back to Huck. We invented the wheel. I can't do better. Thank you. Questions? Yes, sir.
Well, you were mentioning judicial review, and they've never been able to find it, but what is, you know, Jackson is reputed to have said to Marshall about, you know, well, Mr. Marshall has made his rule, now let's see him enforce it.
Right.
But right at the bottom of that last side, you had hope and Brexit. And just in the paper, was it this morning or yesterday, here's the people of the UK has voted, we want out, and now we have the highest court in England saying, yeah, but guess what? The Parliament has to decide this.
Yes. What the Parliament is what? Oh, that's right. They're elected officials, aren't they?
But you would think that the vote of the people would trump the elected officials.
Yeah, well, I would think that Parliament would think that too, especially if they want to keep their jobs. So, you know, it was a fairly close election, vote, a referendum. So it remains to be seen. I don't think it's clear cut that it won't. That Brexit won't happen. But what I've always thought is that Brexit probably won't happen, but what will happen is that Britain will cut a better deal than it's had in the past. I hopefully it will gain recognition for common law, recognition for some of its economic freedoms, and a little more leeway. Because, you know, if you have a strong ground to stand on, you can start negotiating. Yeah, I don't think we want to come back. What are you going to give us to stay? Let's get rid of some of those directives.
I think once if they do not follow up on Brexit, they become slaves to the EU.
I agree.
Because then the EU says, your people voted to get out, your politicians said you're staying in, we can do whatever we want, and that's it.
Well,
And of course, the
hopefully-
EU is run by the socialists.
Hopefully the population will say, you know, we voted and we want you to stick with it, Parliament. We'll have to see what happens. Yes, sir.
I had a question with regards to common law and present and developing nations,
Yes.
like Central Africa or West Africa. How do you...
How can you transfer anything?
Right.
I'll give you a wonderful example. I had the honor and the privilege of doing a Fulbright in Chile. Chile has done it. How did Chile do it? Chile is always one of those at the top of the charts, unlike Africa. Chile started with one of those terrible dictators, Pinochet. Pinochet killed about 3,000 people, but you have to go back before that. Allende had taken over. He was a socialist. He had run the inflation rate up to 500%. So Pinochet takes over. Now he says, oh my God, now I've got to run a country. You and me and those 3 other junta members. Well, we will take records of what we do and we'll be consistent. And by the way, Chicago guys, can you come here and let me know how to put the finances of this place back on its feet? They did that. And Pinochet and the other 3 resolved that they would put a constitution in place and step down within something like 10 years. They did. Unlike most dictators, they actually did it. Okay, now Chile has decent financial footing, but it still has a really crummy judicial system. So the left, we've got 4 socialist presidents in a row. But the left and the right got together and said, you know, our criminal justice system is terrible. Let's figure it out and do a better one. So they got together with an American think tank, and they designed their own program that took elements from common law and from civil law. So instead of the system where in civil law normally you have a panel of judges and the accused comes up and stands, I've seen this in Turkey, it's terrifying. They're the 3 judges up here and the prosecutor, and the accused is down here with his lawyer who can't say anything in the court, and the judge is asking questions. That's the civil law inquisitorial system. It's terrifying. But in Chile, they said, no. We're going to have the adversarial system that they have in the U.S. We're going to have an agency that's a separate agency for the prosecution, a separate agency for criminal defense, and a separate agency that represents the victim. Okay? We're going to tape every case. Okay? Every case is going to be videotaped. They tried this out first with simulated, they started with students, not with established lawyers, they started with law students, trained them to these different roles on fake questions, and they started with small cases. You could choose this new kind of court. They had to publicize to the public, hey, you've now got a right to a defense. You know, if you've been accused, you have a right to a criminal defense attorney, please call this number. They have all kinds of cartoons publicizing it. It worked. It worked. Okay? So, no, you have to be careful with legal transplants, but that doesn't mean you can't adapt it to your own culture. Does that make sense? Yes, sir?
I was just thinking about this, that Adam quote the rule of law, not rule of men, and that, you know, is kind of an ideal we have in the Constitution and all that. But, you know, we kind of free market types tend to be the kind who get involved at judicial review and it's saying, oh, these judges, they shouldn't be free to interpret, they just have to follow the Constitution. Yet there's also this association of common law and judges kind of making law in an organic way with the economic freedom. So is there any tension between let's write down on paper what they're allowed to do and follow to the letter versus.
Well, I think non-lawyers tend to overestimate the effect of judicial review. There are so few statutes that are ever challenged in court that I think its effect as a balance, as a check and balance, is almost negligible. It's the ghost in the back of the room that never materializes, or almost never. To me, what is more frightening, and I still haven't worked this out in my own mind, is I think the rule of law is an ideal that we will never achieve. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep it as an ideal. The problem has come that we have fused French Enlightenment ideas like the list of rights. This is something that Madison didn't want. He didn't want a Bill of Rights. Why? Because he said, look, if you have a right, listed right in the First Amendment to freedom of speech, then the courts are going to start interpreting that, and it's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. Whereas in England, the court said, no, governors, you get out of the religion business. And I think to a certain extent, by our fusing some of these doctrinaire theories with our Constitution, we have exactly that. We've narrowed our definition. So the amendment of warrantless search, you shall not anything shall not be seized without a warrant or reasonable suspicion. Fourth Amendment almost doesn't exist anymore because the Supreme Court has redefined it smaller and smaller and smaller. So it is a problem, and it is something that I haven't figured out a solution for. So how do you create a government? This was a great experiment, but how do we tweak the experiment to make it still protect our rights? And even if it has been imperfect, if you travel to other countries and see that the lack of freedom there, the lack of economic freedom, it is the worst of all possible governments, except for all the others. So we want to keep out, to my mind, we want to keep out some of the overwhelming welfare system that we borrowed from Europe. At the same time, I don't think there's any country on the planet that can go without some sort of safety net for those who cannot support themselves. So, practicality. That was Alexander Hamilton. It's not a perfect world. Let's jettison some of these esoteric theories and figure out what's going to work.
So towards the end, you kind of described the difference between our capitalism and continental capitalism. Would you say that the rise in continental capitalism, especially in the United States recently and Western Europe, is that consistent with neoliberalism? Is that consistent with like the people and a change in attitude, or is that consistent with the government?
The rise in what kind of capitalism? Are you talking about
continental capitalism?
Well, the continent has the civil law system throughout, so it's pretty much going to have the continental conception of capitalism throughout, which is why we tend to be more energetic in terms of technology and development. Where was somebody mentioned the biggest company in the world, Apple. Where did that come from? Where did all this tech come from? So we've still got the engine, but I think we need to protect it. I think becoming like Europe would be a mistake. I'd rather have a couple of very, very wealthy people, and Bill Gates is much wealthier than I. Do I have a problem with that? Yeah. If he's making money, then I can make money with my Apple, right? I don't think that really answers your question, but I think you're more of a theory person.
Well, I was just wondering, there's two ways to look at government kind of consuming power. It's either that we want it to be that way and we're giving it to them, or that the government's just kind of taking it. And I've noticed a lot of rise in neoliberal sentiment, protecting the group against the individual instead of protecting the individual.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I was wondering if you had a gauge on whether it was us asking the government to exude this power, or if it was the government taking it and not really.
Well, I think the nature of government is a predator. Government is always going to take whatever power they can. The minute there are new federal jobs, how many of you would apply for a federal job? You get a raise every 6 months? Okay. It's, you know, it's a good job, right? But that means there are other people who want a good job like that as well. So it's in the nature of government to aggrandize itself. And what we need to guard against, and I think what we've forgotten lately, is that we are individuals. We are not group. We should not define ourselves by being some member of a group. We should define ourselves as individuals with individual interests. And I think that way we can protect our liberty and the liberty of everybody else in the country, as long as we remember individuals. And I don't like corruption, wherever it comes from. Yes, sir.
In one of your slides, you had Dr. Bonham's case. I was just curious, what was that case?
Dr. Bonham's case, I talked about it a little bit. That was the case that established the beginnings of judicial review. Dr. Bonham never finished what passed for medical school back in the 17th century. And he was caught practicing medicine. They charged him 10 pounds. He said, okay, here's my 10 pounds, and he went back and did it again. Well, the British agency that was in charge of monitoring doctors got furious at this, so they threw him into jail. And Edward Cook said, no, wait. If we read the law says if he's committed malpractice, you can put him in jail. But he didn't do that, did he? He just practiced without a license. Your only remedy, you have to stick within what the law says, what the written law says, is to charge him 10 pounds. Work on changing laws, then maybe in the future, but no ex post facto. So yeah, Edward Cook was amazing, absolutely amazing. Yes?
The Nuremberg trials were ex post facto.
Yes, there were.
So
but on the other hand, and this is a sticky situation because now we'd be getting into international law, and the natural theory is that you do not commit genocide. That it is always wrong to commit genocide. So do we tolerate that kind of thing and say shame on you, monsters of the National Socialist Party, or do we punish them? I think in the long run, to try to deter behavior like that is better, but then than letting it slide. But then we've got things like the International Criminal Court, who's tried Charles Taylor and other people. These trials, and Milosevic, these trials go on forever. Do these people, I think Milosevic is spending, what, 20, 30 years in prison? Charles Taylor, I don't know what they're doing. So I understand Grotius, who invented international law, precept of natural law, that there are some things that are just basically right or wrong. I'm not comfortable with having an overarching international government do that. I practiced international trade, and in front of entities in Jamaica and in Haiti against Chinese competition. So I see some benefits to this. Benefits to the WTO, it increased international trade, detriment. It wasn't fair trade, was it? Can't really accuse the Chinese ever of being fair, playing fair, yes.
You related the lack of economic freedom and corruption and all that being sort of in the same side and being things that impair economic development. But as I see it, corruption is not necessarily a bad thing, and in certain occasions it can be a very good thing.
How so?
Well, corruption can be a market reaction to laws that impair growth. For instance, in South America, most of it, you have widespread corruption. And one of the forms that takes place is black markets for everything. For instance, if you go to Bolivia, black markets there are not only about drugs and guns, but you buy clothes and food and everything in black markets. Because the regulations are so absurd that no one can afford the legal food and clothing.
Have you read Hernando de Soto's work?
Yes, I have, and his work on the importance of property rights being clearly defined and all
But
that.
he's also recommending easy systems to register your businesses and your ownership. Because if the system is not transparent, if it is riddled with corruption, you can never get your little business, in his case it was a sewing shop with 2 seamstresses, you can never get it legitimated. That means you can't borrow money on it. If you can't borrow money on it, can you grow it? No. If you get cheated, if your illegal company gets cheated, can you sue on that? No. So what happens in Latin America is that companies stay small.
Yes, well, I agree with that, but the thing is, people do not register companies or small businesses. They're not because they cannot register them, but it's bad for them to register them.
Yes.
If you register them, you're going to pay 80, 90%
Yes.
taxes.
Yes.
So my point is, if the law makes doing business something impossible, corruption is the only way that you can have
Yes.
at least some economic freedom.
Yes, it
And-
is.
and
But
some
then you don't
market
have the
activity.
rule of law, do you?
Well, but it's better than having the rule of law with a bad law, I guess. Otherwise, people wouldn't be doing it.
Well, I think that's a large part of what brought the Soviet Union down, was the black market was much bigger. You know, even the party members, if they wanted blue jeans, they'd go with something's Latin. So it's a bad system. It doesn't let anybody get ahead ultimately. And corruption is a natural reaction to that. I taught LLM, Masters in Law programs at Chile for 6 years. I had this wonderful student from Pakistan in 2001. His name was Hussein Islam. And I asked him about corruption. He said, look, I was a customs agent. I earn $300 a month. If I have a family, I can't feed a family on that. I have to be corrupt. And you know, you can understand that system. That's one of the reasons why I think controlling the growth of government and keeping it as small as possible is so important, is to prevent the overgrowth that Hayek was writing about in The Road to Serfdom. This is a necessary reaction of allowing government to control, and you have to keep passing more laws. It's corruption.
Yeah, well, I perfectly agree with that, but just what I'm trying to point out is that if you just fight corruption, you might end up worse off, because it's better to have corruption and bad law than just bad laws being actually enforced.
True.
So instead of focusing corruption, it's more productive to just focus on the law, because if there's not economic intervention and there's not bad law, there's really no point for people to bribing government officials.
I think one of the things you've got to remember too is the personal autonomy in this. You have to develop in the public a dislike for the system, an intense dislike for the corruption, and an intense dislike for the overgrowth of law. Yes?
Yeah, when it comes to corruption versus more legitimate businesses, like you talked about the Soviet Union a little bit, wouldn't you say that it was the government controls that were causing the very large economic growth or even negative economic growth, and that the black market, not having a black market there would actually make economic growth less, not more? Because like there was this study or research done that on the private land in the Soviet Union, a very, very small percentage, a very large percentage of the food output was from those private farms. So you
Yeah,
can say that
because
black
public
market,
farms failed very, very
So-
early on.
so-
That's why I'm here, by the way.
so you could say that a black market, like pseudo private market, would only arise because people couldn't make it on the public or on the government
Right.
market. or
Well,
black market.
it's not a government market. It's freedom to do what you want, when you want, how you want. And that's that competition that we need so badly. And when the government regulates it, you end up with farms where, and this was what happened in Soviet Russia, was a farmer would work hard to raise a crop, and then the government would take it in and say, oh, it's got to be distributed equally. Therefore, here's your one turnip. You raised, 3,000 acres of turnips, and your share is one turnip. My both my parents were from Russia, and they escaped through Odessa, and there was widespread starvation
So if there was a black
because
market,
of these communal farms that didn't work.
If there wasn't a black market doing other goods, don't you think they'd be worse off than out there?
Well, they'd be worse off there, but they'd be a lot better off if there wasn't A, corruption, and B, bad laws. Or B, corruption, and A, bad laws. Probably more the effect. Corruption is the effect of bad law. At the same point, you know, there was what, $75,000 worth of cold cash in the freezer here? Yes, sir.
Yeah. Could one argue that the problem with Latin America is that they took their legal system from the continent rather than actually conceptualizing their system in terms of the rule of law? So that perhaps one of the fundamental reasons for the lack of economic development is that they just had a counterproductive conception of what a legal system should be.
I think that's certainly one of the elements, but you also want to be careful not to turn the rule of law into a theory, and to remember that you need to do what Chile did, because you can't just transplant these concepts from one culture to another. You have to interpret them in the light of the existing culture. You can grow them. You can grow the concept that, you know, we have the power, we're giving a little bit of it to the government, and we'll decide no government, no more power, that's enough, you have enough, and we don't want to pay any more taxes, to hire any more federal officials. You know, you have to develop an awareness in the public, and a concern and a conception that things can be different. Yeah.
I want to say that coming from a third world country that has the civil law implemented, I just have to say that the black market really inhibits a lot of freedoms, which people are arguing with. I think that the black market, putting an example in my country, if you own a store under the black market terms, which is, you know, you have no control of the government, the money you earn, really, you don't have any freedom with it, because if you are supervised by the government, you cannot use that money, because then they will know this is money coming from black market. It can be seen as, you know, like if it's coming from a...
Can be seized immediately, right?
Yeah, seized immediately. So really you don't have any freedom with that money other than buying things in the black market. So you're limited to that black market. That black market won't have everything you want always. So it's more like a moment thing. Today there's this fruit, tomorrow there's this other fruit that really inhibits you just living in the black market.
So there is no incentive.
Honduras.
There's no incentive for people to invest in your growing business, right?
Yes.
Whereas in a country like the United States, where you have people who get together to form, banks, insurance agencies, you know, I'll invest $100, and because I think I'll get back 1,000, and that way you have now an extra $100 to grow your business, and it may become a mega business. And so, in countries like Honduras, if you have a black market business, it's just that one person or the family. You can't grow it. You can't borrow money. You can't let anybody know you've got the business. When they take it away from you.
I would say that I don't even know if I would call black market entrepreneurs corrupt. I think they're
No,
just working
I was
under
talking
the...
about corrupt officials that prevent people from opening above ground registered businesses. And because they can't open an above ground registered business, they are forced to go into the black market.
Yeah, so really the corruption is the political laws that are necessitating the black market. It's not the black market itself that is corruption.
Exactly. If that wasn't clear earlier, I apologize.
Yeah, I think I was thinking about it a different way. I was thinking about corruption in the sense of business owners, or potential business owners, bribing government officials in order to be licensed or be allowed to operate. I think from your views that you thought that as corrupt officials not allowing businesses to operate. So that's what I think.
Yeah, corrupt officials say, okay, you want to register this business?
Yeah, I was thinking about it a different way. That's why
it'll cost you.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's something on the line that he said. Well, as I see it, in most cases, and my business experience as an entrepreneur in Brazil, is that the thing is that the corrupt government officials are not the ones who stop you from going on a, let's say, legitimate operation. In fact, they are the ones who help you the worst nightmare of an entrepreneur in a place where law is bad. And here I'm going to make a distinction between the two variables that we are talking about. One is good versus bad law. And good law would be the US, bad law would be Brazil. But given the two countries with the same quality of law, and isolating just for corruption, the bad government official is the one that follows the law, because the law doesn't allow you to do business at all. But then there comes this corrupt guy, and he said, well, you know what, if you give me a couple $1,000, I'll pretend I didn't see anything, and you can just get your license and do business. And that guy's going to help generate jobs
all
and
of this
such.
started originally, you know, all of this started originally because you had bad law.
Yes, absolutely.
Too much law. And so it leads to, of necessity, it leads to corruption, and it leads to a black market, and then nobody gets ahead. Nobody gets seriously ahead. You'll get a little bit of ahead for today or for tomorrow, but you can't invest that money, you can't get it out of the country, you can't let people know that you have it. You know, about the only thing you can do is put it back in the black market.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. The problem is the bad law. That's kind of my point, not the corruption.
Yes, sir.
I'm just a little, it seems to me that I keep hearing this talk about bad law and all that, and I go back, you mentioned Hayek's 3 volumes, you know, law, legislation, and I think what we're really talking about in here is bad legislation.
It's over-regulation. So
Well,
whether it
but
comes
that's
from
legislation.
something, not necessarily. In the United States, most of the regulations that cause us problems have never been through Congress.
Well, Congress has authorized, and so the court has
Congress
said that.
authorized the executive to do whatever it wants to permit drugs to be passed.
Yeah.
So now it takes 10 years because we've got an agency, the FDA, that says, oh, you've got to jump through this hoop and that hoop and the other hoop, and we want X dollars, you know, so
But I'm saying that the root of all that is legislation, not what Hayek referred to as law.
Right. The root of that is too much legislation, which is why there's a tug of war as to whether, you know, I think that part of what we've adopted from the civil law world that may not have been such a good idea is that we think that law is primarily legislation. You know, it's fair law because it was passed by a bunch of idiots, right, sitting on a hill somewhere. Instead of, oh, well, this is a judicial decision, it applies to this case, and it may apply to other cases. That's a negative decision. Don't do that anymore. Don't hit that person. Don't steal their money, okay? If you steal money, then you're going to get this case. So by saying that the primary law is legislation, I think we're opening ourselves up to an overgrowth of legislation, because what is the legislature, what is the first thing he wants to do when he gets into Congress? Well, except for a few, I've got to prove myself by passing more laws against crime, right? Or this or that or the other.
No, I think when you start to blame legislature, it opens the door to a new range of issues. Like with capture theory, you know, you have businesses bribing officials to make these laws to make it anti-competitive. So it's like it almost goes in a circle on who's to blame for these regulations that are hurting these businesses, because it's not in establishes best interest for competition.
Well, one could come up with some laws that bar lobbyists from seeking special laws to protect, like the shrimping industry in Louisiana has special laws to protect the shrimping industry that don't apply to anybody else. There's one of the ones that I teach that I get such a kick out of. It's called the New Home Warranty Act that protects us when we get a new home built. Okay? It gives you 1 year to complain about the structure, to complain about the lights, the electricity, minor details, up to 5 years to complain about structure. Sounds good, right? Protects you. Well, what was in place before that? The basic civil code, which said you had 10 years, okay? So this new Home Warranty Act was drafted by whom? Oh, that would be the contractors, yeah.
You're so cynical.
Okay, guys, we are out of time. I just want to say we have different guest lectures. Some of them talk about specific cases, like small picture. And some guest lectures talk about big picture. So today you've seen a lecture that focuses on big picture. And that's usually the most fun that you can have when you're a scholar. Do big picture stuff. What country do better? Like common law, civil law. That's fun. So please join me in thanking Professor Nedzel for